The day Grace was released from prison, two men were waiting for her. One of them sent her to prison, and the other one convicted her. The snow was very heavy that day. They looked like two snowmen waiting outside the prison. Grace vowed in her heart, she'd make everyone pay their price. Grace, get yourself a job and be a good person out there. The prison guard opened the gate and told her so. Grace nodded. Through the iron bar on the prison window, she saw two black cars parked out of the gate. Waiting for her, they were Jacob's Benz G-Wagon and Sean's Porsche Panamera. Heavy snow has caused total chaos on the roads. Jacob and Sean were standing quietly in front of their cars. Sean held a black umbrella and stared at the gate. Jacob kept looking at his watch. One of them was Grace's ex-boyfriend, and the other one was her childhood best friend. How affectionate and caring they looked. If they hadn't sent Grace to prison and told the other inmates to take good care of her, maybe she would be moved to tears. 5 years ago, Grace went to confront Lily Atkinson, and her sister Jennifer Atkinson was also there. In an unfortunate turn of events, Jennifer Atkinson died. Although it was a terrible accident, the court still decided to sentence Grace to 3 years in prison. Lily dragged her sister's lifeless body out of the car and called the police. Sean arrived soon after. Sean, your girlfriend killed my sister. Lily sat on the ground and cried out. Sean's first reaction was to push Grace down onto the ground in case she ran away. But Grace was already too weak to resist because she'd also been hurt. What's more, she was pregnant with Sean's baby. How could you be so evil? When Jacob rushed over, his eyes were bloodshot as he questioned Grace. Before Grace could explain to the two most important men in her life, she was handcuffed by the police. In court, Lily's lawyer was Jacob, Grace's childhood best friend, another blow to her heart. Jacob blamed everything on Grace. She was convicted of reckless driving and involuntary manslaughter and was sentenced to 3 years of imprisonment. Grace, you deserve this. People have to pay for their mistakes, he said. When Grace first got into prison, she was beaten constantly. She was beaten in places without security cameras and had her nails pulled out. She was yanked by the hair and pressed into toilets. Her back was always being kicked, and it was bruised all the time. They even broke the bones in her finger, one by one. At first, Grace didn't know why. She was always stubborn and didn't cry when they hit her. But after a while, Grace found out why they picked on her exclusively. Grace sucked up to one of the female bosses in prison. She would wash her feet, give her massages, and even do her laundry. Finally, she gained the trust of the female boss, and she told Grace why. Girl, you poor little thing. Someone paid us to beat you. Grace knew who it was then in that instant. Sean. This was the man who ordered 200 drones to spell out, "I love you," in the night sky when he was pursuing her. He said, "Grace, I will protect you from now on." Upon seeing their cars outside the prison gates, Grace begged the prison guard to let her leave from the back door, to avoid seeing either of their faces. Besides, what if they were still angry with her and wanted to take their revenge? I am nothing compared to them. I can't afford to provoke them, but at least I can hide. Grace thought to herself. In a trance, Grace remembered her confrontation with Lily. Lily stood in front of Grace while holding her dog and shouted, "My dog is worth $70,000. How much is your grandfather's life worth?" When Grace was 3, her mother died and her father remarried. He abandoned her, so her grandfather raised her all by himself. Her grandfather worked night and day collecting junk and empty bottles for recycling. When Grace was in junior high, she moved to the city from the countryside and lived in a small rental apartment. Her grandfather told her that they could make more money in the city because there was more junk to collect. But Grace knew the true reason why her grandfather wanted her to go to school in the city. The children in the city had shiny hairpins, and Grace wanted them too. Grace's grandfather once stood outside a small accessories store for hours, then he finally went inside to buy the expensive, shiny hairpin for Grace. When the school offered financial aid to students from poverty-stricken families, Grace's teacher Mrs. Green helped her apply for it. That's when Grace met Jacob, Mrs. Green's son, whom she asked to make friends with Grace. Jacob had the best scores at school. He occasionally helped Grace with her studies. She was clever and studious, so her grades improved very fast. Grace's grandfather was very grateful to Mrs. Green, but he didn't have any money, so he offered to help tend her garden. Mrs. Green lived in a small cottage. Her grandfather swept the garden while Jacob and Grace did their homework and played in the yard. Mrs. Green joked to Grace's grandfather, "Your little granddaughter is so beautiful and adorable. How about she and Jacob make a cute couple?" No, Jacob is too good. We don't deserve him," he rubbed his hands nervously and said. Jacob blushed so much that he didn't even dare to raise his head. When Grace was accepted by a top university, her grandfather went back to the countryside. He didn't let Grace go back with him, but she followed him back secretly anyways. Ads by Pub Future. That's when Grace saw him begging friends for money to cover her college tuition. Grace's grandfather did his best to give her everything. Grace vowed in her heart that she would grow up to be a top lawyer so that her grandfather would never have to work again. He was the best grandfather that anyone could have asked for, but then, he died. The year after law school, Grace started dating Sean of the rich and powerful Stevens family. Suddenly, her father wanted to be in her life again, all because of who she was dating. What a nice young man. Bless you too. This was what her grandfather said the day she took Sean to meet him. You are a big girl now. A big girl should have beautiful dresses. My pretty Grace should not wear shabby clothes, her grandpa added. So he continued to collect junk to make money behind her back. Grace told him not to, many times. He was getting too old, and Grace was worried about his health. It was a winter 3 years ago. He was tackled by an unleashed dog in the park when he was collecting junk. He fell unconscious on the spot and was rushed to the hospital. It was Lily's dog. She said it was worth $70,000. That day, Grace's grandpa was sent to the ICU. Due to a fracture of the cervical spine and spinal damage, he became paralyzed. Grace needed to pay a lot of money to the hospital, so she went to Lily for compensation. It was her dog after all. Lily stood in front of Grace and said arrogantly, "You are Sean's girlfriend. You didn't get money from him, so you came to me." Lily had always liked Sean, but he was dating Grace at the time. "My dog's leg is broken because of your idiot grandfather. I should be the one asking you for money. You and your grandpa are just a bunch of country bumpkin. You both deserve to die." Grace didn't hold back. She really couldn't. So, she slapped Lily across the face. Lily and Grace started to fight. Jennifer, who was Lily's sister, saw this and came to help. Grace couldn't fight two girls as she was pregnant and weak, so she got into her car and wanted to drive away, but Jennifer chased after her in her fancy convertible. That's when the accident happened. Grace was arrested by the police. She didn't even try to escape. Her grandfather was in the hospital, but no one would listen to her. Murderer. Grace kept shouting Sean's and Jacob's names. Grace hoped that at least one of them could save her grandfather's life. But they were on the side of Jennifer and Lily. When Grace was detained, she heard that her grandfather had been in the ICU for 15 days and was discharged. But he became paralyzed for life, and he didn't want to be a burden to Grace, so he committed suicide. That day, Grace was lying on the ice-cold ground and had a miscarriage. She couldn't save either her grandfather or her baby. When Grace was locked up in prison, Lily went to see her. Lily whispered to Grace, "My dog has always been obedient. Guess why my dog tackled your grandfather?" The dog didn't know anything, he only followed his owner's orders, and his owner's heart was vicious. Lily hated Grace because she was dating Sean. Grace had a lot of time to think while she was in prison. She blamed herself for the death of her grandfather. Lily would have never harmed her grandfather if she didn't date Sean. Grace had a dream that her grandfather came back to life, and he told her how she was a good girl. Grace knew then it was just a dream because she was not a good girl like her grandfather said, she was a piece of garbage. If she could turn back time, she wouldn't want any shiny hairpins or any nice dresses, and she most certainly wouldn't want Sean. The only thing she wants is just to have her grandfather back. Aha! Grace opened her eyes suddenly. Only then did she realize that she had been dreaming of what had happened all those years ago. She looked down at her calloused hands. After 3 years of imprisonment, and multiple fractures and broken bones, her hands would never look or feel the same way again. Her fingernails had grown back, but the prison doctors hadn't gone out of their way to reset her bones. Her joints looked distorted, and she had residual pain. I was nerve damage. There were many fine movements that she couldn't perform very well. Her fingers hurt more, especially when it was cold or humid outside. Grace flexed her hands and breathed deeply. It's okay. You are okay. Today is a new day. She repeated the mantra as she stood up and resumed working. Sometimes, the memories threatened to consume her. She'd lost more than just her freedom in that accident. Her future, her boyfriend, her grandpa, everyone and everything she'd cared about was gone in an instant. Jennifer Atkinson, whom she'd accidentally killed, was the daughter of one of the wealthiest and most powerful families in the country. What's more, she was the fiancée of Jason Reed, the most powerful man in the city. It's okay. You are okay. Today is a new day. You don't need anybody. Grace finished mopping the room. She was wearing the bright-colored work suit of a sanitation worker with her long hair tied into a simple ponytail. She caught a glimpse of herself in a mirror on the wall. Her delicate face was slightly reddish due to the cold weather, and her mouth was pressed into a thin line. If you were to only look at her face, you would think she was a student who had just graduated from college. But gone was that youthful ignorance. She'd seen how cruel the world could be. The eyes that stared back at her were old, far older, and duller than they should be. She sighed and rolled the cleaning supplies toward the door. Sitting down for a few minutes had been foolish. She hadn't meant to drift off to sleep. With an eye on the time, she moved quickly and efficiently to clean the rest of the building. The life of a sanitation worker wasn't glamorous, but after she left prison, this was the only job she could find. When she was about to leave, she heard a colleague watching the news on her mobile phone. Whoa, Lily is engaged to Sean Stevens. What a lucky girl Lily is. As a superstar and a daughter of a rich and powerful family. Now she is going to marry into the wealthy Stevens family too. Grace shuddered, and then she hurried out of the sanitation service center. She took a deep breath. Then another. She repeated her mantra and pushed the thoughts of her ex-boyfriend and his new fiancé far from her mind. She swept the walkway as this was her routine. This time of year, the cold winter wind blew and it pained her hands terribly. She should have stopped to grab her coat, but she'd been too fixated on escaping her coworker and any more good news about the happy couple. A couple that had stood by and watched as she was savagely beaten. Suddenly, a Ferrari stopped in front of her. 3 men and a woman got out of the car. They were obviously drunk. One of the men looked at Grace with a tipsy expression. He laughed cruelly. I know you. What are the odds of finding Sean's ex-girlfriend? Grace paled. She wasn't expecting to encounter anyone tonight, let alone someone she recognized. The man in front of her was a trust fund baby that she had once cussed out when he'd made a pass at her back when she was dating Sean. In hindsight, many of Sean's friends were elitist creeps. She should have paid more attention to that. After all, birds of a feather flock together. Aren't you a great lawyer? Why are you sweeping the road here? Christopher Peterson asked knowingly. Another man stepped forward after Christopher. Grace didn't recognize him. Can a woman who has been in prison be a lawyer? Again, he questioned. The woman laughed. Bah, a lawyer. Just a janitor now. Christopher stepped closer. Surely there are better ways for you to make money. Come with me, he said. I'll pay you for a night. Beats sweeping the streets. He held out his big, fat hand and the other three burst into laughter. But Christopher wasn't asking, he was already moving in on Grace. Grace dodged, but the building was right behind her and there was nowhere to run. He grabbed her arms and pressed her against the wall at the side of the road. It was late at night, and no one passed by this area. She screamed, but she knew her co-workers inside the building wouldn't hear. Christopher's friends got back into the car. They didn't care what Christopher did to her. He knocked her head back against the wall, and her vision dimmed. The hand around her throat tightened and she clawed at it. Let me go. He used his free hand to pull at his belt, and Grace kicked out hard, kneeing him in the groin. You bitch. He backhanded her so hard that her ears started to ring. When she kicked again, he jumped backward, and it was just the chance she needed. Grace took off running. Christopher blocked the way to her building, so she had no choice but to run down the street. Construction on the road limited the traffic and the late hour ensured there was no one to help her, or to hear her scream. When the car roared to life and tires screeched, she knew he hadn't abandoned the chase. She stuck to the sidewalk thinking she could evade them, but when she turned down a side street, the car jumped the curb and followed. When she came out the other side and circled back down the next street, thinking she could run back to the sanitation center for safety, the car cut around her and clipped her. She collapsed to the ground and struggled to get up. Christopher leaped out of the car and left it running. His two friends fanned out on either side. The headlights all but blinded her. She scrambled to stand as Christopher pulled off his belt. He shook his head at Grace. You didn't think I forgot the way you insulted me, did you, bitch? You told Sean to stop working with me, it cost my family millions. He advanced on her like a predator. Sean isn't here to protect you now. He coiled his belt around his hand like he meant to strike her with it. Fight all you like, but I'm going to fuck you like the bitch you are, right here on the street. Grace struggled to get up. She didn't think anything was broken, but she was still slow and disoriented. When Christopher lunged, she tried to move, but his heavy body pinned her to the concrete. He fumbled at her clothes and she fought. Stop. Get off me. She thrashed even as he brought his hand down with the belt. It burned the skin along her arm and the buckle cut through her clothes and skin. Stop it. Stop. Grace cried at the top of her lungs. I think you should listen to the lady. A cold voice sounded behind her. Christopher froze. Grace turned her head to the man standing beside them. She didn't know where he came from. Fuck off, Christopher told him. Christopher didn't feel scared of the man, it was 3 against 1. Grace whimpered. She had no reason to think this newcomer would risk himself for some stranger on the street. Terence Klein shifted in the front seat of the car and considered his options. His boss, Jason Reed, had approached the group near the sports car. The headlights showed the woman on the ground and they 3 men. He better not go crazy. Terence had seen his boss Jason lose it before. It was terrifying. He glanced around, gauging if there were any traffic cameras on this deserted stretch of road or if there were any other bystanders who might witness Jason killing somebody. He prayed it wouldn't go that far. But he knew Jason and what he was capable of. This was going to be bloody and brutal. Tonight, the road had already been closed, so who would have expected that 5 people in a Ferrari would break in here? They'd disturbed Jason, who wanted to be alone. Every year on this day, Jason always closed this whole road and stayed on it alone, wearing old clothes. No one dared to ask the reason as if it were taboo. Terence, who had worked for Jason all these years, didn't know the reason either. At this moment, as he watched his boss lift a heavyset man with ease and slam his head against the wall over and over, he did not know whether he should stop him. He got out of the car. Beating up some would-be rapists was one thing. Killing them wouldn't be so easy to overlook or clean up. And the men on this road were driving a Ferrari, not a Ford. Which meant, like Jason, they had money. He started toward Jason and then paused when just as suddenly, his boss stopped fighting the man. "Stop, please." Grace touched the stranger's arm. "If you punch him again, he'll die." "So what?" the man said. He balled his fist as Christopher slid down the wall. Grace was stunned. It wasn't until this moment that she really was able to see the man clearly. He was handsome, with dark eyes and a strong jaw, full lips and a strong body. Adds BIPUB future. His hair was longer on top and stylishly messy. When Christopher shuffled back and got to his feet, the man took a menacing step toward him. "Don't," Grace said. "He isn't worth it." The man's dark eyes cut into her. He looked deadly and still, as if people's lives meant nothing to him at all. Grace took a deep breath and said, "It is not worth being imprisoned for a lowlife like him." The man didn't nod nor move, but she sensed him relaxing. Christopher took advantage of the pause to grab his friends and get back into his car. "You'll pay for this," he screamed. Grace didn't know if he was addressing her, the stranger, or maybe both. Whatever, there wasn't much Christopher could do that she hadn't already experienced in prison. The woman who'd been with these bastards stuck her head out of the car. "Holy sh**T. Is that Jason Reed?" The other three men looked at her with shock as they climbed into the car, and one asked, "Jason Reed, the richest man in the city?" "No fucking way." Grace understood their confusion. The man, her savior, wore old clothes. He looked as broken as she did. This was no billionaire. His jacket was threadbare, and his face was haunted. Christopher peeled out with his asshole buddies. Grace watched the car tear up the street. When the road was once again quiet, she looked back at the man. Grace hesitantly said, "Thank you for saving me back there." He grunted, but beyond that, didn't say anything. When he walked across to the other side of the road, he sat down with his back against the wall. It was cold and windy, and the temperature was due to drop even lower. If he were to sleep on the road for the night, would he be alive tomorrow morning? After considering that the man had saved her, Grace started walking over to him. "Hey, it's been a rough night. Aren't you going home now? Where is your family? Do you have their phone number? I can help you call them and ask them to pick you up." He slowly raised his head and Grace saw that it was the same darkness she'd seen in her own eyes too many times when she'd been in prison. The kind of darkness that spoke of nothing to live for. "No hope. If you have nowhere to stay, you can stay with me," she said. Grace did not expect to bring a stranger back to her apartment. She wasn't impulsive by nature, and she certainly hadn't dated anyone or even considered hooking up with a man since her experience with Sean. But this man had saved her from rape, maybe even death. She shuddered at the thought. Those men, the three of them, were soulless, and how could that woman watch on while she was beaten up? As an attorney, she would have fought hard to see all of them in prison for their crimes or complacency in it. But life had taught her that the innocent rarely prevailed. And life was never fair. So why did she bring this man home? Perhaps she wasn't ready to concede just yet. Her apartment wasn't large. It was just one room with a small kitchen and bathroom. She grabbed a blanket from the closet and laid it on the floor. She took her pillow from the bed and placed it on the ground. "The bathroom is just through there," she said. He crossed to it and closed the door behind him. The water kicked on a moment later. When the man came out of the bathroom, his hair was wet. He had washed his hair and face. His sleeves were rolled up. Looking at the man's wet hair, Grace fetched a towel and said, "Bend over, please." The man fixed his eyes on her. I just want to help you dry your hair with a towel. I have no bad intentions, she said. If you don't dry your wet hair, you could easily catch a cold. He still gazed at her but slowly complied. After a few minutes, he asked in a deep voice, "Are you concerned about me?" Yes. Grace did not avoid eye contact with him. "After bringing you to my home, I don't want you to get sick." With his eyes taking her in like she was some oddity, he slowly bent over. Toweling his wet hair, Grace asked, "What's your name?" He remained silent for a long time, but finally answered, "Jay." Jay. Grace repeated his name. It was a very common name, so Grace didn't think much about it. "My name is Grace. Where do you live? What about your family?" "I don't have any family," he responded. She suddenly stopped. How sad. No one should be alone. She had people before, but they turned their backs on her. "Looks like we're in the same boat," she said with a bitter smile on her face as she continued to towel his hair dry. She rose and got a comb and came back to him. These were small gestures, intimate ones, to touch his hair and smooth it away from his face. But the stranger, Jay, had risked his life for her. It was the least she could do. As she pushed his hair back, the true features of his face were revealed. He was a devastatingly attractive man. Strong jaw, full mouth, dark eyes that were inches from hers and searing her in the place where she stood. "Are you hungry?" His dark eyes studied her and he tilted his head. "What?" When he still didn't reply, she wrung her hands together. "I'll get you something to eat." Grace moved to the tiny stove and threw some noodles and eggs into the pot to make a simple bowl of noodles for him. She didn't have any meat, but she chopped what vegetables she had and added them too. She set the tiny table and poured them both a glass of water from the sink. He moved cautiously to take a seat when she set the bowls down. "Eat, but don't eat too fast. It's quite hot," she said. She didn't mean to treat him like a child, but his presence made her nervous even as there was something incredibly calming about him. He lowered his head and ate his noodles quietly. Grace also stared at him in silence. Normally, she'd come home and hate the feeling of being alone, confined in a tiny space. For some reason, the loneliness that she'd usually feel seemed to have disappeared. Could it be due to the presence of another person in the room? After he had finished eating, Grace cleaned up the plates. "I usually sleep with the lights on. I hope you don't mind," she said. Ever since she was released from prison, she had gotten into the habit. "That's fine." Grace took her pajamas into the bathroom and shut the door to brush her teeth and change. Was it weird having a man alone beside where she'd sleep? Yeah, probably. But she didn't feel triggered by his presence or fearful. If he'd wanted to hurt her, he wouldn't have defended her on the street. When she excited and lay down on the bed, he took his position on the floor. The room was silent save for the sound of the heater. If she listened hard enough, she could hear each breath he took. It was a steady rhythm, peaceful even. Grace closed her eyes and focused on sleeping. This was her routine every night because it was almost impossible for her to relax. Even being out of jail, at night she would always dream of her time in prison. She would be beaten, shamed, and abused, and every finger would burn with the pain of being broken and the nails being torn off. She'd wake up screaming, fingers curled, terrified, and heart pounding. However, oddly, that didn't happen tonight. She slept until sunrise and was not visited by her usual nightmares. As she awakened, she rolled over to look at the figure lying on the ground beside her bed. Still here. Was it because of him? Because she was no longer alone in this room. Before she even knew it, she had gotten out of bed, squatted down, and placed her hand on his cheek. Her hand felt warm. He was real, and not something from her imagination. Last night, she really had taken a strange man into her apartment. When she came to herself, she found that he was already awake. His beautiful eyes were fixed on her. Sorry. Her face heated with embarrassment. That. If you don't have anywhere to go, you can also live here. She spoke in a hurry, but after she had said it, she felt relieved. His eyes widened with a trace of surprise. If you don't want to, just pretend I didn't say anything, she added, biting her lip. His mouth finally opened and he spoke quietly. Do you want me? If this had been said by some other man, it would have sounded like they were flirting with her. But when the words came from him, it was like he was just asking a simple question of, want, or, don't want, and she assumed he meant it to mean his presence here. She didn't read any ambiguity into his words, even if there had been, she realized her ads by pub future answer would be the same. Grace pursed her lips. Yes, I do. He stared at her, and a smile slowly formed on his lips. Good. This was the first time she had seen him smile. Although it was very light, it looked extremely beautiful to her. Jason remained at the tiny table while Grace got ready to go back to work. When she left money on the table for him to buy himself some food, he sat staring at the $20 bill for a long time. With her gone, the room was eerily still. None of her light vanilla scent or somewhat nervous energy filled the space. He rolled up the quilt that he'd slept on and then washed out the coffee cup he'd used. Normally he'd be tempted to look around, maybe snoop a bit. But he didn't want to intrude on her space. When he finally left the apartment, there were already people waiting for him outside. After seeing him come out, they respectfully greeted him, Mr. Reed. Let's go, Jason responded faintly. A black Bentley was parked in front of him. Jason got into it and looked at the $20 bill in his hand. It had been many years since someone had given him money like this. On the contrary, for as long as he could remember, people only wanted to take money from him. Terence met his gaze in the rearview mirror. The woman who was with you last night is a contract worker of the sanitation service center. She started renting her current residence here a month ago, and was just released from prison 2 months prior. Prison. Yes, her name is Grace Cummins. She's the ex-girlfriend of Sean of the Stevens family. She was convicted of reckless driving and killing Jennifer Atkinson. She was sentenced to 3 years of imprisonment and had her lawyer's license revoked, Terence said as he carefully observed Jason's reaction. Jason kept his expression bland. Grace, he whispered. Well, this is interesting. Back then, considering how Jennifer Atkinson had been set on marrying him and that she was also a good political marriage candidate, he thought that if he had to marry someone, then she wouldn't be that bad of an option. However, who would have thought that Jennifer would end up dying in a car accident? If Grace knew about his past relationship with Jennifer, how would she react? He considered the $20 bill again. When had someone cared for him, taken his hand, brought him into her home, and said she'd wanted him, just for him? Terence, I want all the information you can find on Grace Cummins on my desk today. Yes, sir. Then, sir, are you interested in this woman? When she got off work, Grace got a call from her father asking her to go home. He said that since she had been released from prison, she should go home to pay her respects to her mother. Grace's mother died when she was 3. Dad had remarried only a few months after Mom died, and her stepmother gave birth to another daughter, Evelyn. It was always clear that Grace's father favored his new family, which led to her being sent to live with her maternal grandmother in the countryside. Grace's grandmother cared for her until 3rd grade, but had to leave her. Fortunately, her paternal grandfather stepped in and kept her by his side. As she'd been in college and at the top of her class, her father finally warmed to her. He eventually started to show off to others that he had a smart daughter. When she and Sean started dating, her home life became the best it had ever been. Her father regarded her as an honor, and her stepmother cared about her well-being, even if only out of pretense. Even her half-sister tried to get on her good side. Something that had never happened before. From the moment Evelyn was born, she'd taken the role of the favorite child, and she'd scarcely bothered to even acknowledge Grace. Dating Sean had been the one act that had finally made her worthy of love in her family's eyes. She knew it was only because he was the heir of the Stevens Corporation. However, at that time, she still couldn't help but long for familial affection. She just wanted to be accepted by them. To be loved. After the car accident, she realized that everything was just her wishful thinking. Coming home, she stepped into her father's house. The decor was mostly the same. Pictures of the three of them. Not a single photo of her in sight. Same couches and tables. The living room had been painted a bright red, and the kitchen was redone with all white cabinets with stainless steel appliances. Grace joined her family in the kitchen. Her stepmother, Melinda Riley, smiled at her. That was something, she supposed. But no hugs or kisses or welcomes home, around here. She listened patiently as her father and stepmother made small talk. Evelyn sipped her tea and remained silent. After a few minutes, the conversation turned toward Evelyn's career. It's not easy for your sister to get roles these days, her stepmother said. Grace took a sip of tea. Oh, truthfully, she'd had more important things to think about these last 3 years, like surviving and serving out her time, and staying sane while she'd been wrongfully prosecuted, imprisoned, and beaten. It hasn't been easy to re-enter the entertainment industry in the wake of things, her stepmother continued. And it's vital that your sister only accept good roles. Grace replied absently. You know that our family isn't very rich, but your sister just happens to need money right now. How about you lend some money to us first, and when your sister becomes a big star in the future, we will return it to you after she makes a lot of money. The real reason for being summoned home presented itself. I don't have any money, Grace answered succinctly. Her stepmother's expression turned stiff, but then she smiled slightly and said, You don't have money, but Sean does. You dated him before, but as soon as you had an accident, he broke up with you. Shouldn't he make it up to you somehow? Were they really expecting her to beg the man who'd deserted her for scraps of money? She couldn't believe their audacity. Grace pushed back from the table. I'm sorry, didn't you, father, and my sister pretend like you didn't know me back then and avoid me the entire time I needed my family? Her father said angrily from the side, So what? Are you here to get even with me? If you hadn't killed someone back then, your sister would have already been cast as a main actress a long time ago and would have already become a big star by now. Grace smiled sarcastically. Back then, when Evelyn had been chosen as the leading actress in a television drama, it was because the Stevens Corporation had been one of the investors in the TV series, and Sean had specifically asked for Evelyn to be the leading actress. Later, after Sean broke up with her, Evelyn's role naturally went up in smoke. Sis, are you still resentful that we didn't do anything for you when you were in jail? Evelyn asked quietly. Her features were perfect, her skin smooth. Her long manicured fingers tapped on the table. Because I think that's very selfish of you. Your actions damaged our family's reputation. The Stevens family, the Reed family, the Atkinsons, Epsteins, Changs. Even the Westons. Every prominent family in the city wanted your blood for what you'd done. What could our family even do? If back then, we had really stood by your side and helped you file a lawsuit, our whole family would have also offended them. Because powerful, wealthy families were above the law and enabled to abuse whoever they wanted on a whim. To hell with justice and the entire judiciary system. Grace shook her head. She wouldn't waste her words or even attempt to make these people see how their actions had pained her. In their eyes, she was the villain, not the victim. How could an ordinary family like ours withstand their retaliation? Evelyn asked. You're right, Grace said coldly. She was nothing to them. A means to an end. They cared nothing for her pain, her suffering, her heartbreak. It wasn't just her trial and sentencing to prison. This disconnect had been there from the moment her mother left this earth. She was through with trying to please them. She'd never strive for their love again because they didn't have it to give. Not to her, anyway. Her eyes burned, and she had only to squeeze her fingers for the pain of her assault to give her strength. Grace rose from the table and smiled gently. She looked straight at her sister. Since you couldn't stand by me when I was at my lowest, why should I bother helping to make you rich? Evelyn's face contorted with rage just as her father's vicious slap connected with Grace's face. What are you talking about? Her father screamed. You drove a car into someone else and were locked up in jail because of it. Our entire family was shamed because of you. You don't have a future anymore. Do you want to ruin your sister's future as well? His eyes were full of disgust for her. The one thing you did right was dating Sean Stevens and then you destroyed it all. We had so much respect from other businessmen and our relatives from that connection. Grace nodded, understanding that her father, Tony Cummins, had been embarrassed. Her relationship with Sean had afforded her dad the chance to claim a higher social ranking. When she fell, he did too. And her father resented her for it. Her face burned and she knew she'd likely bear a bruise. But her expression remained calm as if she didn't care at all. I originally just wanted to say a prayer for my mother. That was why you invited me back home, wasn't it? But now it seems there is no need for me to do it here. I won't step foot in this house ever again. After saying this, Grace walked out of the house without looking back. This place had never really been her home, and she should have stopped hoping for it to be a long time ago. When Grace got to her apartment, the place was dark and the lights were off. When she turned on the lights, she was greeted by cold silence. She could tell at a glance that there was no one else in the room. Was Jason gone? Her heart suddenly felt a little empty. Which was silly, she knew. The man was a stranger. He'd helped her out, but he didn't owe her anything, and she was very foolish to think he'd want to stay with her. Grace let out a bitter laugh. She was alone. Again. Something in her chest ached painfully at the thought, as if acknowledging that even out of prison, she was still constricted, and destined to live out her existence without anybody. Just as she was about to close the door, she saw a figure slowly walking towards her. She was stunned. It was Jason. He was still wearing those worn-out clothes of his from yesterday while he held a bag in his hand. His longish hair almost covered the entire upper part of his face, making it difficult for people to see him clearly at a glance, but she knew that under that mussed hair was a face that could easily take over people's hearts. If not for the clothes, she would have thought him an actor like her sister might work with on one of the TV series. He was that powerfully handsome. Such a man, was he really a homeless person? And if he was, why? Drugs, mental illness, violent tendencies. There were a number of causes that could set someone on the streets, and most of them carried elements of instability. She knew that taking him in like this was an impulsive decision and could put her in danger, but she couldn't stop herself. Perhaps humans were tribal animals after all. They needed company. Ads by Pub Future. I'm back. His voice was low and indifferent, but to her, it was the sweetest sound. Her throat suddenly felt tight. I thought you wouldn't come back. He stared at her. I just went out to buy something. She quickly leaned to one side, pulled him into the room, and closed the door. Then, she saw 2 white steamed buns in the bag he held. She smiled gently and felt that her whole body seemed to be much more relaxed now. Sad, wasn't it? Her family abandoned her, but some homeless stranger was the one to keep her company. We'll eat together, but before that, I wanted to light a candle for my grandpa and mother. Today is the anniversary of his passing, as well as my mother's. Fate was cruel to her. Her beloved grandpa and mother died only a few days apart. Jason's dark eyes followed her movements as they took the prayer candle from her bag that she'd bought on the way home alone. With a framed photo. It was a black and white photo of a man. The man in the photo was about 60 years old. His eyes crinkled up in a smile that looked kind. Grace lit the candles and channeled her thoughts. She kissed the photograph gently. Grandpa, I've started a new life now. I'm living a good life. I have a job that pays well enough for me to feed myself. You can rest in peace, and in the future, I will only live a better and better life. Jason stood to one side and looked at the woman in front of him with a smile on her lips. However, her almond-shaped eyes looked misty. The light of the candle and the light of the lamp in the corner of the room mixed together and caused shadows to dance across her face. She had arched eyebrows, a small nose, and pink lips. She was not at all bad looking, but he'd seen countless women more than Grace. Back then, Jennifer Atkinson, his fiancée, had been a rare beauty. To Jason, Grace's looks were only ordinary. He had seen her information and naturally knew that today was the anniversary of her grandpa's death. He understood her to need to say some kind words and to acknowledge her grandpa's passing, but fresh out of prison and working in a sanitation center, to say she was doing well was one hell of a stretch. Also, Grandpa, there's another person here who's staying with me, she said softly. She then turned her head and looked at him. She smiled. Under the light of the candles, she seemed to glow from within. It was like his presence in and of itself was enough to bring her joy. After a moment, she turned to look at the man in the photo. Again. So, I am doing really good, Grandpa. You can rest in peace. After saying this, she respectfully bowed to the photo. She closed her eyes and though her lips moved, whatever words she said were between her and her grandpa or deity. It was several minutes before she nodded and opened her eyes. All right, I'll clean up and make some soup. Let's have dinner together. Sure, he responded easily. He offered to help, but she bid him sit. He washed his hands and set out plates and utensils before sitting at the small table and watching her move around the kitchen. Her movements matched her name, graceful. And while she didn't hum and there was no sound in the room, there was a rhythm to her motions as if she moved to some languid melody. When she set a pot of soup on the table between them and a plate of some egg frittata she'd mixed up with leftovers from the refrigerator, he inhaled deeply. It smelled delicious. She thanked him profusely for the buns he'd brought back and rather than eat them out of the bag she set them out formally on dishes. His lips twitched at that. She'd been the one to give him the money. He was the guest here. He should be the one thanking her if anything. They both quietly ate, and after a few minutes she asked, Jai, what kind of work did you do in the past? I did all sorts of work, he said vaguely. If there was work to do, then I would do it. If there wasn't, then I would just find a place to rest, he said. Rest. I hope you had comfortable places to rest. From the way she said it, he assumed she was thinking of how she came upon him, wandering the streets on a cold winter night. Hardly a comfortable place to rest. How old are you? She asked. 27, he replied. We're the same age, she said in surprise. Which month were you born in? November. It's July for me. In that case, I'm a few months older than you. Grace took a bite of food. She dabbed at her mouth with her napkin. You don't have any family, and neither do I. Why don't you treat me as your sister from now on? I will also regard you as my younger brother, sister. He smiled lightly. There had never been anyone who had dared to be his family before, and yet this woman still insisted on being his sister. If she knew who he was, would she still dare to say such a thing? However, it was exactly because she didn't know that it was so interesting to him. Can't you? Her eyes darkened. You look sad, he said. This was your idea, adopting me. Her lips twitched and then she gazed back to the small candle still burning on the countertop in memory of her grandfather and mother. When my mother passed away, I was only 3. I don't have many memories of her, to be honest, but I know she loved me. He'd have to think very hard to recall his life at that age. And for a child grieving, the trauma would probably overshadow the good memories. How did she die? Miscarriage. The baby was 6 months along. She glanced back at him. My brother. But he only lived for 10 minutes after entering this world. It would have been so wonderful, I think, having him with me. A tear slipped down her cheek. I like to think that they're together. He grunted. So, a brother. Are you sure you want to be my sister? He asked suddenly. She nodded. But, neither do I have a permanent home nor do I have an actual job. I can't even provide for myself properly. Why do you want to be my sister? Because. Jason swallowed what was left of the steamed bun he was holding as he waited for her to finish her sentence. Grace struggled to find her words. As an attorney, she'd thought out every argument and calculated conversation to be convincing and compelling. But she wasn't looking to sell him on something or to try and win him over. He either wanted her company or he didn't. She took a bite of one of the steamed buns he'd brought. The taste was subpar. In the past, she probably would not have liked them, but now, the taste was secondary. The most important thing for her was to fill her stomach. A dozen different arguments filled her head, for why she should be his sister, but in the end, she went for an honest explanation. Jay, we are the same kind of people. We've both been abandoned by others and can only look for a living on the bottommost rung of society. No one will want people like us, and no one will care about us, but at least we can keep each other warm. I can care about you, and you can also care about me, right? Is that so? He said. She felt her smile wobble. If he were to describe her expression, what would he see? Hope, loneliness, desire, and also some uncertainty. She'd been so guarded the last 3 years. She understood what she was feeling now, vulnerability. It seems that we really are the same kind of people, he muttered. His gaze was like that of a hunter watching a small animal fall into his trap. Sister, he nodded as if coming to some agreement. In the blink of an eye, her smile turned as bright as the starry sky. After dinner, Grace took Jason with her and left for the night market to buy some clothes. He was bemused by her efforts, but apparently, she was taking this whole sister thing seriously. Perhaps the days were really becoming too boring for him. He could easily get whatever he wanted with a wave of his hands, but now this game was becoming somewhat interesting to him. So he indulged her, following behind her like some lost puppy. Now there was a thought, maybe he should just get her a dog and call it a day. It wasn't his place to ease her loneliness. A handful of his normal garments were worth more than the entirety of what was in the store, but he saw the way her eyes widened as the cash register tallied his clothes. She nodded resolutely and paid, and it left him feeling something he couldn't describe, to see her sacrifice her hard-earned money to buy some spare clothes for him. Ads by Pub Future. Here, she said. Put this on. The cotton jacket was thick, but not particularly attractive. Is it warmer now? She asked. Yes, Jason answered indifferently. He lowered his eyes and looked at her. She was almost a head shorter than him. Actually, you don't need to buy these clothes for me. I am used to the cold. I'd be fine even if I were to only wear my previous clothes. It doesn't mean that you should be cold just because you're used to it, she said. I don't have much money and I can't buy a lot of clothes for you, but I can at least let you wear something warmer. Why are you so nice to me? He asked quietly. Because I am your sister. She smiled and accidentally touched his hands. She found that his hands were freezing, so she held his hands with her own, lowered her head, and blew on his fingers before starting to rub them back and forth. Your hands are too cold. Rubbing them like this should make them a little warmer, she said. His hands, no, His whole body stiffened for a minute. Never had a woman rubbed his hands like this before just to warm them. He had never liked physical contact with other people, but it seemed that he did not reject her touch as much. Perhaps he was fine with her touch because, right now, she was an important part of this game for him. Seeing that he had no reaction, she suddenly seemed to think of something and glanced at her hands, which were full of calluses. Did I hurt you? My hands are quite rough. As she spoke, she quickly let go of him. He frowned. I don't think your hands are rough at all, but your hands actually felt quite cold as well. Sister, why don't you rub your hands on mine for a while longer? As he spoke, he offered his hands to her again. She was slightly stunned, but then she held his hands in hers again. Compared with his big hands, hers were much smaller. She lowered her head and breathed warm air over his hands from time to time. Her nose had gone slightly red due to the cold. In his opinion, she looked adorable like this. 2 days later, Grace received a phone call from Evelyn. Grace, father said that he was going to throw the album away today. It was not easy for me to ask him to leave the photo album alone. I want to give it to you. Can you come to get it? Grace was shocked as she knew what Evelyn was referring to. It was the album that contained photos of her and her mother before her mom died. If you don't come, then I might accidentally lose the album, Evelyn said in a gentle voice. She then added the specific address and ended the call without waiting for Grace's reply. Grace stared at the phone in her hand. She naturally knew that Evelyn would never hand the album to her for no reason. She had to be plotting something. However, that album contained almost all her memories of her mother. Sis, a deep male voice rang in her ears. She came back to her senses, took a deep breath, and said, Jai, I have to go out for a bit. You should get to bed. As she said that, she hurriedly stood up, put on her coat, and went out. She didn't realize that a pair of eyes remained fixed on her, staring at her back thoughtfully. When Grace got to the address Evelyn had provided, she found out that it was a country club. When she walked into the private room Evelyn had mentioned, she found that Evelyn wasn't the only person inside. There was also an overweight, middle-aged man who looked to be in his 50s in the room. Evelyn, is this your sister? She was the girlfriend of Sean Stevens back in the days. The man looked at Grace and asked. Yes, Assistant Director Curtis. Grace didn't miss the way her sister used his proper title. She was really looking to score points. It seemed, this is my sister, Grace. And Grace, this is the assistant director of my film crew. He has always said that he wanted to see you after learning that you were Sean's girlfriend, Evelyn said with a smile. Where is the album? Grace asked coldly. I'm first going to have to ask you to put in a good word for me with Assistant Director Curtis. A good word. Is that what they were calling it these days? Grace imagined anything this heinous man wanted would have little to do with talking. If Assistant Director Curtis is happy and is willing to give me more screen time, Evelyn went on, I will naturally give you the photo album. That last part was said in a low voice and the words sounded like a threat. Well, since you are already here, let's have a drink. Director Curtis directly poured Grace a glass of red wine, indicating that she should start drinking. Grace was still staring at Evelyn with pursed lips. It seemed that this kind sister of hers was going to sell her off in exchange for increased screen time in a film. Evelyn picked up the wine glass and handed it to Grace. Grace, since you destroyed my opportunity to stardom in the past, it's not too much for me to ask you to compensate me now. What's more, if you win Director Curtis's favor, you might be able to live a better life in the future. I'm doing this for your own good. It's the first time I've heard someone say such things in such a clean and righteous sounding way. Grace directly swatted the wine glass away, causing the red wine inside to spill all over the ground. Don't you want the album anymore? Evelyn asked through gritted teeth. I never thought I'd have to be selling my body in exchange for it, Grace replied. Her mother would not have been happy to see her do such a thing. However, when she turned around and was about to leave, the director suddenly said, well, you don't care about giving me any respect, do you? Do you really think that you are still the girlfriend of Steven's family heir? I heard from Evelyn that you are now a street cleaner. You should consider it a compliment that I even offered you a drink. Grace replied, I don't need your compliments. Under the influence of alcohol, Assistant Director Curtis rushed towards Grace and slapped her right in her face, then said, if I want you to drink, then you will drink. Why are you acting all high and mighty when you're just a failure, AF convict? As he spoke, he grabbed Grace roughly by the jaw. In the next instant, he had the bottle of alcohol and was pouring it into her mouth. Grace wanted to push him away, but a man's strength was much greater than a woman's, not to mention that Evelyn was helping him from the side. Her sister was holding Grace's arms, so she could only jerk and try not to choke. The director paused only to thank Evelyn for her help, saying, you're still smart, he told her. I'll talk to the writers and give you more screen time. Naturally, Evelyn put in even more effort. Thank you, Assistant Director. My sister isn't smart, so please be understanding. Grace didn't know how much wine she had been forced to drink. Her alcohol tolerance wasn't good, to begin with, and at that moment, she already felt a little intoxicated. She tried to hold on to the last of her sobriety. I want to go back. All right, I'll take you back in a moment. The man only relented when Grace wobbled on her feet. Grace's vision wavered, but she saw the heated look in this man's eyes and she tried to plan a way to escape. Assistant Director Curtis liked the way his handprint glowed bright red on this woman's face. The woman in front of him did not have sexual charms. She was too thin and plain. He preferred his women with fake tits and hip. But when he thought that this woman had once been Sean Stevens' girlfriend, he couldn't help but get excited. He wouldn't mind F-ing the same woman as one of the wealthiest men in the city. He couldn't help but think that it would be prime PSSY. But then his cell phone rang. And rang. He silenced it without looking, but then it started up again. He glanced at the caller ID. It was his brother, the head director of this film. He had relied on his older brother to get this position on the set, and he couldn't imagine why his brother would be calling. However, after picking up the phone and listening to his brother curse and yell, Curtis felt as if he had suddenly woken up from a ads by Pub Future drunken stupor. His face turned pale and his breathing quickened. How could it be? She is just a sanitation worker with no background. Even if her former boyfriend was Sean Stevens has a fiancée now, so he has no reason to care about her at all. Otherwise, why would his ex-girlfriend be cleaning garbage? Don't you dare touch this woman, his brother yelled. You have to let her leave safely. You have to know that the boss of the company himself called and warned me. The boss also said that if anything wrong happened to this woman tonight, the entire production crew would be dismissed tomorrow. As for you, you wouldn't be able to stay in this city. What? Are you not listening? They threatened you and me explicitly. Curtis's hand shook. How is that possible? Hundreds of millions of dollars worth of investment. Dismissed. He glanced at Grace. Who the hell is this woman? How would I know? Either way, you are the one who caused this mess. If you dare to touch even a single hair of hers, watch how I take care of you. His brother launched into another rant. How is she now? She's fine, right? Curtis wanted to cry but no tears came out. He did not dare say that he had slapped Grace and forced her to drink more than half a bottle of wine. That he'd been about to drag her into the nearest vacant room and rape her senseless. At this time, Grace staggered to open the door of the private room and went out. Evelyn stepped forward and tried to stop her. Sacrificing her stepsister was nothing as long as she could be famous. That woman. Curtis surged forward and caught Evelyn by the arm. He spun her around and slapped her hard. Evelyn tripped and almost fell to the ground. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't be in this mess. He watched Grace stumble out of the room. Evelyn cried and held her cheek. Assistant Director Curtis, what are you? Are you trying to set me up? Who is your sister? Who is behind her? He asked sternly. Evelyn had a blank look on her face. I don't know what you are talking about. My sister has no one. Not even her family. Grace staggered into the hallway. The effects of the alcohol made her feel like she was walking on air, and her vision became more and more blurry. I have to go back, she told herself. I have to go back quickly. I will be in danger if I pass out outside. She tried her best to tell herself that she was going home, but her body seemed to be a little out of control. A blurry figure appeared before her eyes. That figure gave her a sense of familiarity and made her feel at ease. She felt that as long as that figure was there, she would be safe. Grace walked towards that figure step by step. With much difficulty, she finally arrived in front of him. She was outside. The cold air helped sharpen her senses before everything started spinning. Jai. She raised her head and looked at the figure. The next second, she finally closed her barely open eyelids, and her swaying body fell down. He took hold of her falling body with a single arm. Jason stared at the cheeks of the woman in his embrace. His fingers gently caressed the area where she had obviously been slapped. He clenched his jaw and his free hand curled into a fist. Mr. Reed. Terence put away the phone in his hand and carefully explained the situation that he had just discovered. Miss Cummins must have been forced to drink some alcohol, and then she was slapped. Is that so? Break the hand of the person that hit her, Jason said. He picked Grace up and carried her into the limousine. Terence was shocked. Sir, are you sure? Previously, Mr. Reed had not done anything in retaliation when his fiancée had died. But now, with the perpetrator of the accident, he wanted to protect this killer. In the car, Jason couldn't stop staring at the marks on her face. As he looked closely, he thought he saw a second, dimmer bruise on her other cheek. She was obviously just a toy to him, but why was he so unhappy when he saw that she had been injured by someone? Was it out of pity? But when had he even felt pity for anyone? When Grace woke up, she saw the ceiling of the rental apartment and a familiar face. Jai. Grace sat up abruptly, but her head throbbed with pain. She took a deep breath and waited for the pain to pass. How did I get back here? I was at that private club. The previous scenes in the room replayed in her mind, and her expression darkened. I saw you coming out of the entrance to the club, so I brought you back, Jason said. But I didn't tell you that I went there. When you were answering the phone, I heard the address, he said. Would you like some water? You'll probably feel better. He handed her a glass of warm water. She took a few sips of it and then felt more comfortable. I didn't do anything strange when I was drunk, did I? She couldn't help but ask. No, he said, but he recalled that after he had carried her back to the rental apartment when he wanted to put her on the bed, she had clung to him. When he went to lay her down, she pulled him onto the bed and rolled until she was on top of him. A man of rigorous control and training, how had he let his guard down like that? Before he could get up, she touched his face with her hands. Your eyes are so beautiful. I really like them, she murmured. Like. The word was not strange to him. After all, there were always women who said that they liked him and liked his eyes. In the past, when he was young, his father would always look into his eyes and become lost in thought. His father would mutter to him, the kind of eyes you have are deceptive. They look like they're very emotional, but in reality, they're the most heartless. I don't know if you will be emotional or heartless in the future. They're clean. She ran her fingertips across his brow. Clear, he sneered. She was drunk. Of course, his eyes were clean or clear or whatever. He'd showered this morning. It's like they have never been tainted by any sin. They're clean. She was so drunk that she didn't seem to notice that her face was almost touching his. Jay, don't be afraid. I will protect you. After saying that, she lay on his chest and fell asleep. Protect him. This woman can't even protect herself, but she wants to protect him. What a joke. Grace's face blushed as she stared at him. She really didn't remember. You didn't do anything. You just fell asleep. Hearing this, she let out a sigh of relief. His eyes fell on the red, swollen part of her cheek. Does your face hurt? Her eyes widened with surprise. It's fine. This was the truth. After all, she had suffered much worse pain in prison. What happened yesterday? How did you get hurt and drunk? He stared at her and asked. Ads by Pub Future. Nothing. I just met a drunkard and had a little conflict, she said lightly. She didn't want to tell him about the dark things from last night. She always felt that he was clear and clean. Even though he had been wandering on the streets, he was still pure like they. Horrors of this world had yet to touch him. If possible, she hoped that he would stay that way. Is that so? He frowned. It would be great if I had arrived earlier. In that case, you wouldn't have been hurt. In reality, it wasn't true that he couldn't have solved this matter earlier. This was just a game that added a bit of fun to his boring life. He had even expected that something might happen after she entered the private room. But when he really saw what had happened, he found that he was not happy. It's already good enough for you to have come to the club to pick me up. Otherwise, I might have slept right next to the street. Grace said and pulled at his hand. Thank you, Jay. It's really good to have you here. And I'm fine, really. It was just a slap in the face. It's nothing to me. It was nothing to him either. But the bruise on her face offended him, and when she smiled as she did now, looking at him like he was the greatest man in the world, it stirred something to life inside him. What? Evelyn tricked you into drinking with a man. She's shameless. I'm going to find her. Lena had gone to look for her friend that day and saw that Grace's face was still faintly red and swollen. So what? Grace held back Lena. I was too careless. I thought that she would at most try to get some money from me. I didn't really expect, but fortunately, Jay came to pick me up when I was drunk. Jay. He's the person who's living with me now. Think of him as my younger brother. I got him to call me sister, Grace said. When she mentioned Jason, a smile unconsciously appeared on her face. Younger brother. How old is he? Lena asked. 27 years old, a few months younger than me. Lena almost choked on her own saliva. She couldn't believe that her friend was living with a man. What are you thinking? What if he has evil intentions? Have you ever thought that you might be putting yourself in danger? You studied law, didn't you? Are you not thinking about the risks? I know what you're worried about, but, Lena, with someone living with me, I don't feel as lonely. Plus, Jay is a nice person. What do you mean that you feel lonely? Don't you still have me? Lena said. Why don't I move out and live with you? Don't do that. Your parents will hate me even more if you move out of the house, Grace said. When the car accident happened, she had not been drinking, but all the evidence seemed to show that she had been driving under the influence. No one believed her words except Lena. And during the 3 years she had been in jail, Lena had been busy with Grace's case. She had even given up studying abroad. For her, this also made Lena's parents angry with Grace because they thought that she had delayed Lena's work. They hated her for disrupting their daughter's career path. And it was the truth. If it weren't for her, Lena would have had a better life now instead of being an obscure designer in an architectural firm. Moreover, Jay is like a little brother to me. You know, in the past, I always wanted to have a little brother. Now, my wish has finally come true, Grace said. Lena knew that there was no way she could dissuade her good friend. She could only put up with the second best option. Let me meet with him next time. Only after she had met Jay could Lena feel at ease. Sure, Grace replied. By the way, this is a copy of your case from back then. There's also some information I found over the past few years. Lena passed a stack of documents to Grace. Since you have been released already, are you planning on reopening the case? I don't know. I don't know where to find the witness from that year, and all the evidence still points toward me. I haven't been able to reverse the verdict for 3 years. In the future, perhaps we'll find an opportunity to turn over the case in the future. Don't forget that you are Grace Cummins, and the Grace I know doesn't give up easily, Lena said. Grace smiled, but it was forced. Maybe she would have tried to overturn the verdict for herself 3 years ago, but after spending 3 long years in prison, her high spirits and sharp edges had been obliterated by pain. And by acknowledging that the system was broken and corrupt, Grace took the stack of information back to the apartment. She saw that there was no one in the room and Jay was nowhere to be found. That void of emptiness inside her deepened. What she'd said to Lena was true, she liked his company. But how would she feel when he inevitably moved on? Would this time have been a balm, or would she feel worse, and even more lonely? As the hours ticked by, Grace worried that something had happened to Jay. He didn't have a mobile phone, so she couldn't even make a phone call to contact him. Maybe he'd already moved on, and her whole vision of a sibling and having some semblance of a family was just a pipe dream. Grace went outside and walked to the entrance of the residential community. She kept looking around, hoping to see some sign. Go him. After God knows how long, she finally saw a familiar figure walking towards her. Jay. Seeing him approach, she finally heaved a sigh of relief. Jay eyed the figure that was rushing towards him and could not help but be slightly startled. He looked at her as she ran over to him. She was panting slightly, her face completely red from the cold, and yet her pretty eyes were bright. Great, you're finally back, she said. Sister, are you waiting for me? He gently touched her cheek, and the coldness seeped into his fingertips. It seemed that she had been waiting outside for a long time. Yes, I was so worried because you hadn't come back yet and it's late. Fortunately, you've come back safely, she said with a smile. He rolled his eyes slightly. She was worried about Jay, the homeless man, instead of Jason from the Reed conglomeration. However, if she found out that he was the Jason in the future, would she still worry about him so much? Not likely. Raising the corner of his mouth, he said, I was working. He made up some job about handing out flyers. She nodded. Your hands are cold. I'll help you warm them up. As he said this, he held her cold hands in his palms. Taking the same action as she did last time, he rubbed the backs of her hands with his palms. Grace felt her hands gradually warm up. It was such a cold day, but it felt so warm. Jay, it's so good to have you home, she muttered in a low voice. Ads by Pub Future. His lips curved into a smile. I'll keep that in mind. I hope you won't regret saying that in the future. I won't regret it, she said. Well, my hands are warm now. Let's go back to the house and I'll heat up the food. She pulled him into the complex and did not notice a black car parking at the corner of the street just outside. Meanwhile, in the car, Terence couldn't believe what he was seeing. Mr. Reed must have just been warming the hands of a woman. He had never seen Mr. Reed do this to any woman. Even Jennifer Atkinson, who had once been Mr. Reed's fiancée, had never been treated this way. But now, Mr. Reed was doing this to Grace, the same woman who was the cause of Jennifer Atkinson's car accident. It made no sense. Recalling the scene of Mr. Reed going to the club and picking up the drunk Grace at the door, Terence felt that his brain was not working properly. What was going on in Mr. Reed's mind. Had Grace taken up space in his heart? Surely not. But as he stared at the couple across the parking lot, holding hands and staring into each other's eyes, he couldn't help but wonder if this unlikely situation was real or if he'd imagined it. The next day, at Reed headquarters, when Terence reported on Jason's schedule and work, his gaze could not help but turn to Jason's hands. Jason's fingers were long and slender. Terence would even go so far as to say his boss's hands were beautiful, and that was saying something because he didn't think of hands or men in that way. Terence had seen this pair of hands choking someone without mercy, almost taking that person's life. Mr. Reed didn't care about getting his hands bloody, and the thought of it could make people shiver and give them goosebumps. However, he had never seen this pair of hands being used to keep another person's hands warm, let alone those of a woman who had been locked up in prison. "What's wrong with my hands?" Jason's voice suddenly sounded in Terence's ears. "Ah, nothing." Terence came to his senses and quickly turned his eyes away. He handed an invitation card to Jason. "This is the invitation. In 2 weeks, Lily and Sean Stevens will get officially engaged. Chairman Stevens hopes that you can join." Engagement. Jason glanced at the card. Call Power T. Limited. Of course, he understood the intentions of the families in sending this invitation. After all, Jennifer Atkinson, the eldest daughter of the Atkinson family, had once been his fiancée. They wanted to see his attitude. Then let's go and have a look. In the afternoon, Terence accompanied Jason to a private hospital in the city. Terence stood outside the ward. Jason pushed open the door and walked in slowly. The old man in the ward had once dominated the world. He'd built the Reed empire, and it was his efforts that grew his family's fortunes. But his only son had run away from home for a woman. Many years later, the only 2 things that would come back to the Reed family were a handful of ashes and a child. Jason looked at the old man in the hospital bed. This man, who deserved to be called his grandfather, was dressed in a hospital gown with a needle in the back of his hand. His body was getting weaker and weaker day by day, and he looked thin, frail. Mr. Reed looked at his only grandson and said, "You're here." "Yes, I'm here," Jason said. The grandfather and grandson quietly faced each other. The 2 of them seemed to be extremely familiar with this kind of silence. After a long while, Mr. Reed spoke. "I heard from my secretary that the Stevens family and the Atkinson family are going to join forces through marriage." Even during the old man's hospitalization, his secretary would still report to him every day. "They're getting engaged in 2 weeks, and they've already sent us the invitation," Jason said. "You are going. Why shouldn't I go?" he asked back. Mr. Reed stared at the grandson in front of him. After a long time, he suddenly laughed and said, Good, you're not like your father." Since the death of Jennifer Atkinson, his grandson had not been in contact with any woman for years. Mr. Reed had once worried that his grandson would turn out to be like his son, who had been deeply trapped in his love for a woman. He thought perhaps Jason would avoid any reminders of his pain. Or he might resent the Stevens family since Sean's girlfriend had been the one to crash into the car and kill Jason's fiancée, but Jason seemed calm and collected about everything. Jason naturally understood what Mr. Reed meant by saying, "You're not like your father." He replied, "No, I am not him, and neither will I be like him." Mr. Reed grabbed hold of Jason's wrist. His wrinkled old fingers seemed to have used up all of their strength. "Remember what you have said today. Do not act like him." If he was willing to listen to me back then, he would not have. Mr. Reed gritted his teeth. His fingernails sank into Jason's wrist, producing deep red marks. Jason acted as if he could not feel the pain at all, and a mocking smile slowly rose from the corners of his lips. He would never give up everything for a woman. He was not his father. He would never do something like groveling at her feet until there was nothing left of him. After coming out of the hospital, Terence asked, Mr. Reed, do you want to go back to the mansion, or back to the west side? Jason said absently. The west side was where Grace lived. Terence didn't know how long his own superior was planning to stay in that small rental apartment with that damaged woman. Then a thought occurred to him, maybe Jason wasn't as calm as he pretended to be. Maybe he indeed intended to seek his revenge, and his time spent with this Grace woman was only in preparation for something. On the way to the west side, at a traffic light intersection, Terence suddenly noticed something. Oh, Mr. Reed, Miss Cummins is on the side of the road. Jason turned his head and saw a slender figure sweeping the garbage with a broom at the side of the road. She was wearing a fluorescent work suit with a simple ponytail. Because of the cold weather, every breath she exhaled was accompanied by white vapor. At this moment, an electric bike sped by, trying to catch the green light. It bumped into Grace's leg and made her fall to the ground. However, the person riding the electric bike didn't stop but simply rode away. Mr. Reed, do you want to find out who the owner of this electric bike is and make him take responsibility? Considering his actions when Grace had gotten drunk and been beaten up, Terence assumed Jason would stand up for her again. Jason's gaze fixed on the woman who had fallen to the ground outside the car window. His grandfather's voice rang out again in his mind. Remember what you have said today. Do not act like him. He would never care about a woman like his father did. It was just a game, and right now he was not Jason Reed, but only some random stranger, so why would he care about a sanitation worker named Grace? There's no need to worry about it, he said placidly as he looked away. Terence was stunned. The red light turned green, and the car continued to drive forward. Ads by Pub Future. At this moment, Claire helped Grace to her feet and said, Grace, are you alright? Do you want to go to the hospital? Grace gritted her teeth and checked her injury. There was no bleeding. There were only some heavy swellings where her ankle had been scratched. No need. It's just a bruise. I'll be fine. If the swelling doesn't diminish, go and get checked out, Claire said, and then she swore at the driver who had done the hit and runs. Grace thanked her friend and then resumed her cleaning. In the evening, at the end of her shift, Grace returned home. As soon as she entered the room, she saw a figure sitting under the light. Sister, you're back. The man stood and greeted her. In an instant, the chill in her body dispelled. It turned out that what she wanted was just a person who would wait for her, even though this apartment was simple and small. It was having someone that cared about her in it that made this house a home. Well, I'm back. She smiled gently. I'm hungry. Give me a few minutes to wash up and then I'll prepare our dinner. Okay, he answered and then watched her limp across the room to the kitchen. What's wrong with your foot? He asked, even though he already knew. It's just a scratch. I'll massage it with safflower oil, she said lightly, but her face would change slightly with every few steps she took, and her forehead beaded with sweat. Jason pursed his lips. Then it would be better to clean it up now. As he said this, he stretched out his arm and caught her from moving past. Then, he pulled up the cuff of Grace's pants. She sucked in an unsteady breath. Immediately, an obvious lump met his eyes, even though it was still covered by her sock. When he pulled the sock down, he saw the bruise on her ankle which had already swollen to the point of going purple. He thought that he wouldn't care. Even if she broke her leg, he would still be indifferent. But, for some reason, when he saw her injured foot, it stirred something in his chest. It's nothing, she insisted. Some safflower oil will mend it up. She tried to pull her ankle out of his hand, but his fingers firmly held onto her, making her unable to move at all. There was a moment of silence that filled the air. Where's the safflower oil? He asked. It's in the medicine cabinet on the bedside table, she answered. The next moment, she gasped because he had suddenly picked her up, bridal style. Carrying her, he walked to the bed, put her down, and took out the oil from the medicine box. He sat on the edge of the bed, pulling her injured right foot onto his lap. Then, he took off her shoes and socks and pressed his finger against the lump. It was a terrible bruise. Hot to the touch and incredibly swollen. He was no doctor, but he pressed down on the spot to feel for any breaks or fractured bones. She hissed a breath but didn't complain. Point your toes, he said. Now flex your heel. Roll to the right, then left. She clenched her jaw but was able to make the necessary movements. There was nothing wrong with the bone. It seemed that it was as she said, only a flesh wound. Jason poured some safflower oil into his palm and began to rub Grace's ankle. His touch was not light, but she gritted her teeth and her body trembled. The pain would have been intense. Truly, forgetting. Clipped as she did, it was a miracle she wasn't more injured between the impact and her fall. Isn't it painful? He asked. If it had been any other woman, she would have screamed in pain a long time ago. I'm fine, she said, although she couldn't hide her wince. This doesn't hurt as much as when I. She paused but did not say the word prison. Instead, she said, it's nothing compared to what I've had to deal with in the past. Jason glanced at Grace with a thoughtful look in his eyes. He naturally understood what she had not said. When she had been in jail, even when he had only watched coldly and not taken any action, the Atkinson family had not let her go. Moreover, there were many people there who wanted to be on the Reed family's good side. Her life in prison had been much worse than that of an ordinary person. It seems that my sister has suffered a lot before, he whispered. It's all in the past, Grace said. There, she whispered. The pressure is already reducing, thanks to you. He grunted but didn't believe her. It would take weeks for a contusion like this to heal. Jay, thank you. You are a really good person. She smiled at him. Good person. His lips curved. Even those who flattered him never used the words, good person, to describe him. He'd done many things in his life, but none of them would qualify him as good. Sister, do you really think so? He was teasing, but she replied in earnest, yes, of course, Jay is a good person. She spoke matter-of-factly as if, at least in her eyes, he really was her good younger brother. Then, if one day you find out that I'm not a good person, will you be disappointed? He asked. Since that night at the country club, Evelyn had been feeling anxious. After all, Assistant Director Curtis's attitude that day had been really odd. He'd gone from praising her to slapping her, from desiring Grace to shoving away from her sister. After a few days of him not coming to the set, his older brother, the head director, had also been replaced. As for the reason, no one in the film crew could seem to explain it. However, Evelyn felt that the change in the film's director had something to do with Curtis. When she thought about it some more, she became afraid that it had something to do with Grace. Then, a few days later, when she heard Assistant Director Curtis had been hospitalized and that his right hand seemed to be ruined for life, she was dumbfounded. His right hand. If she remembered correctly, that was the hand that he had used to slap Grace. Evelyn was panicking inside. What the hell is going on? After Assistant Director Curtis answered the phone that night, his attitude towards Grace had completely changed. As for what had happened to Assistant Director Curtis afterward, was this all a coincidence? Or could it be that Grace really had someone powerful behind her? But if Grace really had someone watching over her, would she still be bitterly sweeping the road every day? Evelyn couldn't help but tell her parents about what had happened that night. When her father heard that his youngest daughter had sent his eldest daughter to drink with an old man, he immediately glared at Evelyn. How could you ask your sister to do such a thing? At the very least, our family is. It's just drinking together. What's the big deal? Besides, Evelyn did this for the family. Only if Evelyn makes it as a star villa. Family have a good future. Otherwise, do you want us to rely on your eldest daughter who had been to jail? Her mother interrupted. Upon hearing this, her father's expression fell, but he didn't say anything. He'd never been warm to Grace, but Evelyn acknowledged that she had set her sister up to be sexually assaulted. Her father wasn't stupid. He knew that too. If he pressed her, she'd deny it. As she said, it had only been a few drinks. Her father couldn't prove the rest, and she'd launch ads by Pub Future into a tearful performance if he pushed the point. Dad, could Grace really have found someone to help her? Otherwise, why would Assistant Director Curtis have let go of her that night and even later ended up in the hospital himself? Evelyn asked. How would he have known anything about this? Her mom touched Dad's arm. You are her father after all. You should try to ask her about it. If she really has a backer now, she should tell the family about it. I'm worried that if she gets involved with some bad people, then our family will be dragged down as well. Again, she was in prison before, and there are all sorts of people in prison. Who knows who she had met in there? Evelyn covered her mouth as though the very suggestion terrified her. Oh, Father, what if they come after us? Or her criminal friends do more damage to our family name? Father, you were so honored and revered before Grace killed that woman and dishonored us all. Her father frowned when he heard this. Then he slapped his fist down on the kitchen table. If she dares to implicate the family again, I'll break her legs myself. When Grace was cooking a meal in the apartment and waiting for Jason to come back for dinner, the doorbell rang. However, when she opened the door, she saw her father, her stepmother, and that stepsister of hers. The three of them then rushed straight into her apartment. Her father immediately asked, Did you meet some shady people in prison? I'm telling you right now, if you dare do anything that will affect our family, don't expect me to deal with you lightly. What on earth did I do that would require you to deal with me? Grace looked at her father coldly. Did you ask someone to break Assistant Director Curtis's hand? He was just asking you to drink with him, and he didn't do anything else. How could you be so vicious? Did you lose your memory while in prison? Do you think that you can just do whatever you want after meeting some evil people in prison? Her father scolded. Grace snickered. It seems like karma is real. He got what he deserved. Also, if you think that there's nothing wrong with drinking together, then go ahead and ask your precious daughter Evelyn to drink with him instead. What did she scheme against me for? This is what you owe her. If it weren't for you, if it weren't for me, do you think she would have even had a chance at being chosen as the female lead for a film in the first place? Grace paused and let that little barb land. Then she said directly, Don't tell me that I owe her anything, because I never did. Sister, I've never blamed you for your sins. You don't need to speak to Dad like this. Evelyn acted like she had been wronged. You're so noble, Grace replied sarcastically. She was bemused that they thought they could charge into her home and bully her into being some sex toy to advance her sister's career. This entire conversation and trying to blame her for her sister's shortcomings was ludicrous. Her stepmother quickly comforted her daughter and looked at Grace with dissatisfaction. Grace, don't take your anger out on your sister. Your father just doesn't want you to go down the wrong path. If you go to jail again, what will happen to our family's reputation? What's the point of talking to her about all this? Anyway, go to Assistant Director Curtis immediately. No matter what method you use, ask him to forgive you. You can't implicate Evelyn because of this matter, do you understand? If you dare to ruin Evelyn's future, just watch how I deal with you. Her father ordered. Grace felt that this was laughable. Did her father really think that she could be controlled at will? Or was it that when one's heart was completely biased, one would ignore everything else they didn't agree with? I won't apologize to anyone, so you can go back now. You're not welcome here, Grace said. As her father heard these words, his face flushed with anger. Who do you think you are? He raised his hand to strike her. Grace subconsciously took a step back, but when she moved her feet, her ankle rolled. She winced and braced for the hit. But it never came. A hand blocked her father's fist in midair. Jai. Grace had not expected Jai home so early. Jason looked coldly at the three uninvited guests in the room. He had read Grace's files and so he knew that these three were her father, stepmother, and stepsister. Get out, he said coldly. Who do you think you are to stop me from hitting my own daughter? Let go, her father shouted. He felt that his hand was about to break from the man's grip. Then, her father got what he wished for. Jason let go of his hand after throwing her father out of the apartment. Her stepmother and Evelyn rushed outside the apartment to help him up. Grace, why are you letting a stranger treat your father like this? Her stepmother scolded. Who is this man? Her father asked with hatred. Fine, Grace, I see how great you are. You hooked up with a wild man right after getting out of jail. Her father's voice suddenly stopped. Jason growled. The sound was more suited to a wild beast than this man, but the intent was the same. He would fight. He would kill. Grace dragged Jai inside and slammed the door behind him.